Lu Zhou led the group into the sword tomb. As soon as they entered, they saw countless flying swords soaring under the flow of primal energy. With the faint light, the group discovered bodies on the ground. Jian Jin stepped forward to investigate and said, "This person hasn't been dead long. He's from the Elixir Heart sect." Qin Jun was somewhat puzzled. Why would the Elixir Heart sect come here instead of focusing on their alchemy? Jian Jin explained, to be precise, it's not just the Elixir Heart sect. The Celestial Masters sect, Hinku School, and 7-Star Villa have also come. How could they miss the rare opening of the sword tomb? Little Yuaner found this odd. Is this demonic sword really that good? Lu Zhou spoke up. It's a top-tier celestial treasure, the best of the best. Best is a vague adjective, but it's enough to indicate the value of the demonic sword. While they were talking, more flying swords were brought over by the surging primal energy. Jian Jin smiled slightly, drawing his Dragon Roar sword from its sheath. The Dragon Roar sword emitted a dazzling golden light, its forceful energy spinning and knocking over a dozen flying swords to the ground. After a glance, he sheathed the sword disappointedly. Yellow tear. Just as the Dragon Roar sword was sheathed, the fallen sword started trembling, attempting to fly back into the formation. It really needs to be destroyed. Jian Jin intended to continue, but a cultivator who had finally caught up from behind beat him to it. Yellow tear. It's a yellow tear sword. At least it's a start. These cultivators took advantage of the swords not flying back and snatched them up, quickly depleting the supply. Jian Jin shook his head in silence, sighing inwardly. I really brought the right people. Qin Jun said, those who don't want to die with a sword should get out now. Hearing Qin Jun's words, many cultivators quickly expressed their thanks. Qin Jun waved his hand. Don't thank me. Thank the old gentleman. Hearing this, over a dozen cultivators bowed to Lu Zhou. Thank you, old gentleman. Received devout kneeling from 12 people. Gained 120 points of merit. Of course, some cultivators were not satisfied with the yellow tear and continued to follow Lu Zhou and others. Lu Zhou entered the sword formation area nonchalantly, activated his protective forceful energy, and briefly felt the airflow driven by the sword formation. Finding it not highly damaging, his forceful energy could withstand it. Seeing this, Jian Jin flattered. The senior's control over primal energy is truly divine. Lu Zhou ignored him and continued forward. Before long, the group reached the deepest part of the sword tomb. Looking around, a shocking scene appeared. A huge tombstone towering into the clouds stood at the very center. The tombstone was engraved with dense inscriptions and was held steady in the middle of the sword tomb by 8 giant chains coming from different directions. Around the tombstone, various swords of different shapes and sizes were scattered. Even more astonishing, countless flying swords circled the tombstone in the sky, creating a magnificent spectacle, like a school of fish swiftly moving through the sea. These innumerable flying swords repelled any cultivators who tried to approach. Nearly 100 cultivators were scattered in every corner, staring intently at the tombstone. Lu Zhou frowned slightly. He had no interest in these swords. His goal was to obtain the last fragment of the heavenly writing scroll. Where is my item now? Qin Jun pointed to a faint light in the distance and replied, that passageway. Little Yuaner also noticed this. It seems like the pathway leading to your ancestral tomb. Jian Jin felt a bit awkward. The little ancestor's words were heart-piercing, but they seemed to be true. Qin Jun looked around the surrounding sword formation. How do we get there? The 7 Absolutes formation is like a tiger blocking the way. It seems difficult. Lu Zhou also pondered this issue. There were too many flying swords in the sword formation, and their power was immense. Flyover using impenetrable, but one sheet is not enough. There might be other traps in the passageway. At this moment, cultivators who had already appeared near the tombstone began charging towards the sword formation. Hear my command. Take down the sword formation. Newcomers line up at the back. Line up. Jian Jin was somewhat confused. Everyone's here to try their luck and grab a good sword. Why line up? Qin Jun explained. There are too many people. 4 of the 10 famous sects have come, and they will definitely be prioritized. The smaller sects and schools will inevitably unite. The orthodox path likes to impose these meaningless rules, but in the end, strength still determines who gets the spoils. Above the gathered cultivators, indeed a cultivator was floating, looking like he had been temporarily elected to lead everyone's attack rhythm. At this moment, the swarm of swords in the sky circled the huge tombstone and flew back towards the people. For a moment, palm imprints, sword forceful energy, Taoist seals, Buddhist seals, fell like rain. Jian Jin watched with relish. Really, these guys are quite smart, fishing like this. After a round of attacks, many flying swords fell from the sky, but soon, the air currents picked up other flying swords from the sword tomb, quickly rejoining them in their orbit. The creator of the 7 Absolutes formation was truly a genius. The formation always managed to gather enough flying swords to circle around the tombstone. The leading cultivator commanded, ceasefire. Prepare for the next round. Qin Jun watched them dividing the spoils of the recently fallen flying swords and shook his head. They won't be able to get many swords. The designer of the 7 Absolutes formation would have anticipated this. When the number of swords decreases to a certain level, the formation will reclaim them. Hearing this, Jian Jin hurriedly clutched the sword in his hands. I knew I shouldn't have brought the Dragon Roar here. I feel like we're going to lose out. Seeing this, Qin Jun chuckled. Don't worry. worry. The Seven Absolutes formation should prioritize reclaiming the swords that belong to the sword formation. At this moment, the cultivator floating in the air looked towards Lu Zhou and the others again. May I ask which sect or school you are from? Jian Jin replied. None. Then please step back. This is the Seven Absolutes formation. Don't regret it if you get hurt. Upon hearing this, little Yuaner was about to get angry, but Lu Zhou stopped her. Let them go first. A bunch of incompetents who like to rush into battle and be cannon fodder. Let them be. Jian Jin took a step. The elder is wise. We'll act according to the situation, which suits my style of doing things. Meanwhile, in the tranquil small abode, Siwei was leisurely sunbathing. Yi Zhixing appeared beside him, bowing and saying, a message from the direction of the sword tomb. The elder has entered the sword tomb. Hearing this, Siwei suddenly opened his eyes. Say that again. Yi Zhixing was stunned, seeing the leader's emotions fluctuate so greatly for the first time. The elder has entered the sword tomb. Siwei's face became extremely stiff. Although he wasn't angry, one could feel the anger filling his heart. Master, you've messed up my bid plan. Siwei had not expected that releasing the news of the sword tomb opening widely and his second senior brother single-handedly opening the entrance to the sword tomb was meant to lure the orthodox sects into a trap. But now, his master had also entered the sword tomb. To complete the plan, would he really have to kill his master? Siwei pondered for a moment, then asked in a deep voice, is there any news of the second senior brother? Yi Zhixing replied, Sword Demon Senior opened the entrance to the sword tomb and then left the area. Sword Demon Senior doesn't like others following him, so he's been out of touch. And the first senior brother? The Grand Master is currently targeting the orthodox sect, but he has said that if the leader has any issues, you can find him anytime. Siwei sighed, his expression calming. I trust that the thoughts of the two senior brothers are the same as mine. Abandon the sword tomb plan. Yi Zhixing. Hearing this, your subordinate will strictly follow the leader's orders. He was about to turn and leave when Siwei spoke again. Who conveyed the message? Yi Zhixing answered, one of the three great sword maniacs, Jian Jin. Check his real identity. After Yi Zhixing left, Siwei murmured to himself, if we can catch this big fish, it's somewhat acceptable. Meanwhile, inside the sword tomb, the group of swords flew around for another circuit. After many cultivators had attacked, they stopped to collect the spoils. A total of 50 swords, of which 10 were not graded, 30 were of the yellow tier, and 10 were of the profound tier. Not very lucky, not a single earth tier sword. Someone questioned, isn't it said that the sword tomb nourishes good swords every so often? How come after so long, not even one earth tier sword has appeared? That's not necessarily true. We only fought 50 flying swords, and earth tier and above are very rare. How easy could it be to obtain one? Another person responded. The floating cultivator nodded in agreement. However, just then, the group of swords around the tombstone suddenly flew in another direction, colliding violently with each other. As they flew over the sword tomb, they swept up the swords stuck in the ground, forming an even larger group. 7 faint light circles lit up on the ground. The Seven Absolutes formation was triggered. Qin Jun saw this and frowned slightly. The Seven Absolutes formation has been triggered. These fools! Jian Jin exclaimed in surprise. The gate of the sword tomb hasn't even been opened. Old senior, I was really screwed over by your disciple. Hearing this, Lu Zhou looked suspiciously at Jian Jin. Jian Jin smiled awkwardly and waved his hand. All my informants were eliminated by people from the dark net. Having no choice, I had to come to the sword tomb myself. I lost to Siwei the first time we crossed paths. Lu Zhou calmly said, just clever tricks. He wanted to use the Seven Absolutes formation to eliminate these orthodox sects. A good idea indeed, but the passageway of the sword tomb now leads to the imperial tomb. Even blocking the entrance to the sword tomb would be futile. Jian Jin nodded, finding it reasonable. Qin Jun said, perhaps there are other traps waiting in the passageway. That's why he dares to plan this way. At that moment, the flying swords finished gathering and mercilessly shot towards the orthodox cultivators. Not good. The Seven Absolutes formation has been activated. As soon as the words were spoken, a large number of cultivators immediately sprinted outside. The flying swords accelerated, piercing through the chests of cultivators, and in the blink of an eye, more than a dozen low-tier cultivators were killed. Those with higher cultivation levels activated their avatars and forceful energies to resist. At this time, a huge golden body flew out, blocking the path of the flying swords. It wasn't an avatar, but a golden body. The pursuing flying swords that hit the golden body were all deflected back. The golden body is another manifestation of the avatar, essentially not much different. Many cultivators, seeing this, exclaimed in unison, Buddha's golden body, a high-level Buddhist master. It's a great Buddhist master. This golden body was clearly much larger than the Arhat's golden body. The Arhat's golden body is comparable to a 5-leaf cultivation, the Sahaja's golden body to a 6-leaf golden body, and the Buddha's golden body is comparable to a 7 or even 8-leaf golden body. And this one, right here, is the Buddha's golden body. I didn't expect to encounter a great Buddhist master here. Jian Jin glanced at the golden body, then turned to Lu Zhou. Compared to the elders Buddha's golden body, it's like a minor spirit meeting a great wizard, like a grandson meeting his grandfather. Qin Jun asked with curiosity, does the old gentleman also understand the Buddhist Zen Zen practices? Jian Jin generously praised. The elder claims the second place. No one dares to claim the first. Not only does he understand, he is a master. Since witnessing the Buddha's golden body, other Buddhist cultivators seem too weak, lacking any appeal. For others, this is indeed a true master. After the master used his golden body to block the flying swords, he looked back at the cultivators behind him and shouted, "A bunch of useless fools." The crowd was stunned, confused. How could such a master utter such crude words? "Drop the flying swords," the master shouted again. "Yes, yes," the reminded cultivators hastily threw their swords away. When the swords landed in the formation, they were swept up by a surge of primal energy and returned to the seven absolutes formation. The sword formation gradually stopped its assault, returning to its pattern of rotating around the huge tombstone. If not for the seven faint light circles on the ground, they might have thought the swords were being manipulated. After the seven absolutes formation calmed, the Buddha's golden body also disappeared. The previous efforts of those cultivators were all in vain. The hard-earned flying swords were handed back, and everyone's attention focused on the master. Now seeing him clearly, he appeared thin, dressed in gray monk's robes, looking like a vigorous elderly man. Jian Jin, seeing this scene, suddenly laughed. "Kong Yuan, how did you end up looking like this?" The monk frowned, his gaze sharp as he stared at Jian Jin. The crowd exclaimed, "Master Kong Yuan? The Kong Yuan from the Great Void Temple?" The Great Void Temple, the foremost among the four great Buddhist sects, always commanded respect. Since the incident at the Runin Sacred Altar, Master Kong Yuan had made a notable name for himself in the cultivation world. Faced with such a master, these cultivators dared not speak more than necessary out of fear. Kong Yuan stared at Jian Jin and asked, "You know me?" Jian Jin chuckled and responded, "Master Kong Yuan, I can understand if you want to disguise yourself as a common little monk, but please hide the Buddha beads. They're too conspicuous. Among the four great Buddhist gates, only Master Kong Yuan has Buddha beads." It seemed that the Buddha beads had been exposed by the surge of primal energy during the display of the golden body. None of that mattered now. Kong Yuan looked at his beads and said solemnly, "Since that's the case, there's no need for me to hide anymore. I must have the demonic sword within the seven absolutes formation. I want nothing else. How about that?" Other cultivators dared not negotiate. After all, strength rules here. They had no right to the demonic sword. If someone could lead them to overcome the sword formation and gain the other flying swords, it would be a decent outcome. Thus, the cultivators almost accepted the situation by default. "If that's the case, please devise a plan, Master. We agree for you to take this demonic sword, but this sword formation is extremely mysterious. How can we break it?" Hearing this, Jian Jin shook his head. What noble sex? Seeing this bald donkey, they all cower instantly. No backbone at all. Kong Yuan looked at the sword formation and spoke, "In pursuit of this sword, I've made thorough preparations. Those who are irrelevant or disagree with me taking the demonic sword can leave now." Upon hearing this, two people silently left the group and walked towards the exit of the sword tomb. "There are indeed some with backbone," Jian Jin muttered. Kong Yuan's gaze then fell on Lu Zhou and the others. "What do the benefactors think?" Jian Jin chuckled. "What if you can't break the formation?" Kong Yuan was unperturbed. "If I dared to come, I naturally have the confidence." Jian Jin continued, "I think you can't break this formation. If you can't and still want this demonic sword, then you really have thick skin." Lu Zhou, Little Yuaner, and Qin Jun all looked at Jian Jin, thinking, this guy really has a way with words. Kong Yuan, being in a high position and the abbot of the Great Void Temple, would not tolerate others questioning him. "If I cannot break the formation, I will not take the demonic sword. But if even I cannot break it, who can?" Jian Jin waved his hand, retorting, "I don't know about others, but you definitely can't." Kong Yuan glanced at Jian Jin again, a hint of murderous intent flashing in his eyes. Jian Jin tensed up and deliberately stepped back a few paces, moving closer to Lu Zhou. Kong Yuan no longer paid attention to Jian Jin, instead addressing the many cultivators, disciples of the Elixir Heart Sect, 7-Star Villa, Celestial Masters Sect, Tenku School, lead the charge. As his voice fell, more than 20 people stepped forward. "Please instruct us, Master. I want to see your true capabilities. Do not disgrace the faces of your leaders," Kong Yuan said. The 20 disciples looked at each other and sighed. Among them, the strongest had just stepped into the nascent divinity tribulation realm. Most were in the Brahma Sea realm, and a few were in the divine court realm, nowhere near able to contend with Kong Yuan. "Let's begin then," someone responded. The cultivators returned to their positions and summoned their avatars. Jian Jin, unable to bear watching those pitifully small avatars, covered his eyes with a mix of sympathy. "Should we take action now?" Lu Zhou shook his head. "No rush. If others are willing to be cannon fodder, we might as well benefit from it. Besides, now is not the peak time. Save the props if we can." Kong Yuan glanced in Jian Jin's direction and snorted coldly, the murderous intent in his eyes flickering briefly. He sighed lightly, his monk's robe quivering, and a faint golden light appeared. Clear mirror platform. Lu Zhou was familiar with techniques like the clear mirror platform. The most recent use was by Jing Yan's disciple Wu Nian on the Lotus platform. However, Monk Kong Yuan's clear mirror platform seemed much stronger than Wu Nian's. As Kong Yuan radiated light, a huge circle spread out from him. Everyone within the circle received perceived the enhancement of the clear mirror platform. The cultivators felt an increase in their internal power and showed surprised expressions. They launched more powerful palm and Taoist seals, charging at the incoming swarm of swords. Cultivators from the 10 great sects, far stronger than those from smaller sects and schools, became even more formidable under the augmentation of the clear mirror platform. The effect was surprisingly good. With this attack, the swarm of swords was dispersed, and the flying swords fell from the sky. Meanwhile, the 7 light circles on the ground lit up again. Jian Jin asked in confusion, "Elder, what do these 7 light circles mean?" Lu Zhou explained, "The first is Tian Shu, the second is Tian Xian, the third is Tian Ji, the fourth is Tian Quan, the fifth is Yu Heng, the sixth is Kai Yang, and the seventh is Yao Guang. The first to the fourth are called the leaders, the fifth to the seventh are called the markers, together forming the Big Dipper." After Lu Zhou explained the 7 stars formation, Jian Jin showed an enlightened expression. "So that's how it is." Little Yuaner was still somewhat confused, and Qin Jun then simplified it further. When the 7 stars land, the sequence from the Big Dipper's handle to its connection is Tian Shu, Tian Xian, Tian Ji, Tian Quan, Yu Heng, Kai Yang, and Yao Guang. These 7 light circles joined together, creating a formidable power. At that moment, the defeated swarm of swords seemed angered and launched a fierce attack on the cultivators. Kong Yuan, seeing this, snorted coldly and sent out a series of palm seals, then turned to the remaining cultivators and ordered, "What are you waiting for? Strike while the iron is hot. Block the 7 stars from landing." The bystander cultivators, seeing the glowing flying swords on the ground and how Kong Yuan and others were blocking the swarm, became excited and rushed into the area of the 7 stars landing. "This is an earth tier," someone shouted excitedly. "Let's go down too." Many cultivators, seeing someone pick up an earth tier weapon in the area of the 7 stars landing, became frenzied with excitement, completely unaware of the danger they were in. Kong Yuan snorted coldly again, withdrew his palm seals, and the clear mirror platform disappeared, causing the cultivators' power to drastically weaken. The sky full of flying swords swept through the cultivators on the ground, mercilessly piercing their bodies in a bloody spectacle. The cultivators standing outside were completely stunned, especially those in the area of the 7 stars landing, who were nearly turned into a hornet's nest by the swarm. Little Yuaner turned her head, covering her face, unable to watch any longer. Lu Zhou watched the scene calmly. His memories and experiences as Ji Tiandao had desensitized him to such sights. This wave of attack took away more than 30 cultivators, leaving the surviving cultivators to flee in disarray, all covered in wounds. "What are you actually doing?" someone angrily questioned Kong Yuan. Kong Yuan chuckled, pressed his hands together, and said, "Amitabha, to obtain the demonic sword, the 7 stars must be fed. This deed requires sacrifices. I commend their courage, and when I return to the Great Void Temple, I will surely conduct rites for their souls." Kong Yuan's actions sparked anger among the crowd, but he remained unconcerned. "I gave you a chance. Since you missed it, don't blame me." As the 7 stars landing was nourished by blood, its energy swelled. Rings of light continuously spread, with the blood flowing along the patterns, connecting like veins, and the energy flowing throughout. The 7 absolutes formation is coming. The 7 stars have landed and are now active. "It's too late to get out. What do we do, Elder?" Lu Zhou remained silent, expressionlessly watching the cultivators flee. Suddenly, someone shouted, "Run fast." Kong Yuan glanced at the 7 stars on the ground and the rampaging swarm of swords in the sky, and chanted coldly, "Amitabha." The sound waves rolled outwards, causing those with weaker cultivation to feel their scalps tingle and their blood churn. Someone unable to bear it shouted loudly, "Kong Yuan, what are you actually doing?" Kong Yuan's expression turned extremely grim. "You will become part of the sword tomb. You will merge into the sword." Who could have imagined that such a venerable monk would turn so sinister and ruthless? The flying swords stabbed at all cultivators like a torrential downpour, the swords attacking mercilessly. The area of the 7 stars grew larger, covering the entire tombstone. The flying swords no longer circled the tombstone, but aimed to take everyone's life. At that moment, a flying sword hurtled towards Lu Zhou. "I'll block it," Jian Jin shouted. Little Yuaner snorted, "My master doesn't need your protection." Lu Zhou was indifferent to these exchanges. Their corner was shielded from most of the flying swords. Moreover, Lu Zhou himself was of divine court realm cultivation and could handle attacks of this magnitude. However, cultivators from the 4 great gates struggled to defend themselves as the sword swarm targeted them first. Meanwhile, the tombstone began to tremble. Seeing this, Kong Yuan laughed triumphantly. "My chance has come." He stepped on the ground, dodging the sword swarm, and a dark energy burst forth from his body. In an instant, he appeared above the tombstone and slammed down fiercely with his palm. Boom! The dark energy struck the huge tombstone, creating cracks, and the inscriptions on it lit up. Seeing this, Jian Jin furrowed his brows. "So the demonic sword is inside the tombstone." Kong Yuan stood atop the massive tombstone, looking down at everyone, while the sword swarm fiercely attacked the other cultivators. He remained in complete safety. Lu Zhou, observing the dark energy emanating from Kong Yuan, transmitted a message. Demon Zen? The last to practice Demon Zen was Shuxinchan of the demon-slaying sect, also the only one to attain a primordial spirit with the Demon Zen. Kong Yuan immediately noticed the old man beside Jian Jin. Such a transmission was not something ordinary people could achieve. Kong Yuan had never met Lu Zhou, and with the dim lighting, it was even less likely he could recognize Lu Zhou. He shook his head and laughed loudly. The little Zhuxinjan is not worthy to be mentioned in the same breath as me. I practice both Zen and Demon Zen, the foremost in all of history. Lu Zhou frowned slightly, stroking his beard and speaking. Old man wants to see how you will break the 7 absolutes formation. Hearing this, Kong Yuan felt a jolt in his heart. If it were only Jian Jin, he wouldn't be worried, but the sudden appearance of this master of transmission made him cautious. Thinking of reaping the benefits of a fisherman to break the seal on the demonic sword with the 7 stars formation, Kong Yuan decided to sacrifice all the cultivators present in blood. The 7 stars have opened. Please, benefactors, depart. Amit Ba. As his voice fell, the prayer beads around his neck spun up, emitting a burst of intense light. Kong Yuan's Buddha beads began to rapidly shoot towards the surrounding cultivators. Buddha beads are an extremely special weapon, usable not only as hidden weapons but also for self-defense. They have many uses and require high cultivation from the user, unlike swords that only need one to perfect the offensive technique. The beads shot out, forming several black meteors in the dimly lit space. Unable to restrain himself, Jian Jin drew his dragon roar sword. Little Yuaner also stirred, wanting to step forward. Lu Zhou quickly stopped her. Let him go first. If you also rush out, do I have to rely on that useless Qin Jun for my safety? Jian Jin's figure flickered, creating multiple images in the air. Golden sword forceful energy flew out, directly hitting the incoming Buddha beads. The collision noise was incessant. Monk Kong Yuan seemed to have anticipated this, and his gaze fell on the dragon roar sword in Jian Jin's hand, showing a hint of admiration. Good sword. Jian Jin smiled slightly and soared towards Kong Yuan. Kong Yuan lightly tapped his foot, ascending straight up. His body seemingly split between top and bottom, the lower half immersed in darkness, the upper half bathed in light. Double Zen, someone exclaimed. My God, anyone with a bit of cultivation knowledge knows that water and fire do not mix. Yin and Yang cannot coexist, yet Kong Yuan of the Great Void Temple manages to unify Double Zen. What incredible talent. This was the rumored divine skill, Double Zen Unity. Kong Yuan of the Great Void Temple had advanced greatly in his cultivation during his retreat, and it seemed he had indeed made significant progress. The crowd watched Kong Yuan in awe, discussing. No wonder the monk is confident enough to challenge the sacred altar, having cultivated Double Zen. Even if the leaders of the major sects came, they couldn't handle him, unless the old demon of the evil Sky Pavilion makes a move. Kong Yuan has advanced greatly in cultivation, but still dares not seek revenge on the evil Sky Pavilion. Probably only the old demon can suppress him. Unfortunately, this is the Sword Tomb. How could the old demon possibly come here? It was strange that even the major orthodox sects were pinning their hopes on the evil Sky Pavilion, let alone the smaller sects and schools. At that moment, a golden determination seal appeared on Kong Yuan's upper body, and a dark determination seal appeared on his lower body. The two determination seals overlaid each other, spinning as they rapidly enveloped the approaching Jian Jin. Jian Jin's swordsmanship rained down, countless afterimages stabbing at the determination seal. However, Kong Yuan shouted loudly, and the dual determination seals suddenly expanded like a spring, forcing Jian Jin to retreat. I'm dodging. Realizing the old monk's defensive capabilities were too formidable, Jian Jin decided to temporarily avoid his sharp edge. The dual determination seals expanded and tightened and loosened as if practiced millions of times, quickly crisscrossing towards Jian Jin. Jian Jin hastily positioned his dragon roar sword in front of him, but was still hit by the dual determination seals, sent flying back. Ouch! Catch me! Jian Jin fell to the ground, a mess from the impact, in pain all over. If not for his protective forceful energy which absorbed most of the force, the dual determination seals would have severely injured him. Little Yuaner, seeing this, scoffed with a laugh. Serves him right. Kong Yuan continued to hover above the tombstone, satisfied with how his determination seal had repelled Jian Jin. However, his attack did not cease there. The Buddha beads scattered around once again flickered, shooting out cold gleams. Can this even work? Jian Jin widened his eyes and hastily flipped backward to retreat. Little Yuaner frowned and said, keep going. Jian Jin waved his hands repeatedly. I can't fight him. I've already tried my best. He's completely out of my league. It was clear to any observant person that Jian Jin hadn't exerted his full strength, not even using his avatar. How could that be considered trying his best? Now was not the time to be preserving one's life. At that moment, 3 Buddha beads shot towards them again. Little Yuaner snorted coldly, channeling her robust forceful energy to the front, and directly deflected the beads away. Jian Jin chuckled dryly. This monk is no ordinary opponent. His determination seal can block my dragon roar sword. Perhaps only the elder can handle him. Little Yuaner appeared unconvinced, her expression eager to try. Although Lu Zhou knew that Little Yuaner had many treasures for self-defense, he still felt uneasy. Indeed, Jian Jin hadn't given his all, but from the brief encounter, it was evident that Kong Yuan's capabilities were far from ordinary. This old monk still had many tricks up his his sleeve, and if he seized the opportunity to strike thunderously, it could spell disaster. Lu Zhou shook his head. Kong Yuan, noticing this gesture, smiled smugly, realizing it now. Is it a bit too late? I've said it before. This demonic sword is destined to be mine. Lu Zhou didn't engage further, only hummed softly. A zen that delves into demons is not true zen. Kong Yuan disdainfully countered. A zen that can kill is good zen. Under the heavens, only I have mastered double zen. Lu Zhou shook his head and sighed. I thought you had some earth-shattering method to break the 7 absolutes formation. I overestimated you. Saying this, Lu Zhou took out a lethal strike card, but before he could use it, the tombstone behind Kong Yuan suddenly exploded with a loud bang, cracking open. Stones flew about, and the inscriptions floated up under a strange energy, dense runes buzzing around like mosquitoes. The 7 light circles now shone several times brighter than before. When the debris settled, an ancient bronze giant sword hovered in the center of the tombstone, with inscriptions gathering around it like moths to a flame. The giant sword seemed to be activated by the energy of these inscriptions, beginning to tremble slightly. The 8 chains around tightly locked the blade, leaving the onlookers stunned. It turned out that these chains were not there to stabilize the tombstone, but to seal this giant sword. Kong Yuan, floating above, seeing the demonic sword reveal itself, shouted excitedly, the demonic sword has finally appeared. I have been patient until now, and finally, it has paid off. Lu Zhou stopped what he was doing, quietly observing this scene, feeling an uneasy premonition. At that moment, the giant sword began to tremble violently, as if it were trying to break free from the chains. I won't be polite then. Kong Yuan made the first move, flipping upside down 180 degrees, diving down with a single palm, and grabbing the demonic sword as he fell. Forceful energy surrounded the blade, but the demonic sword seemed to sense the intrusion and challenge, erupting with fierce sword chi, which forced Kong Yuan to retreat repeatedly. At the same time, the 7 absolutes formation blazed brightly, and all the surrounding swords, summoned by the demonic sword, changed direction and converged rapidly. For a moment, the sky was filled with the shadows of flying swords. Kong Yuan hadn't anticipated the demonic sword being so difficult to control, and he immediately activated dual determination seals in an attempt to fend off the attacking swarm of swords. Nevertheless, the main force of the sword swarm still ferociously attacked Kong Yuan. Kong Yuan shouted, dual determination seals, exerting all his effort to defend. However, the remaining part of the sword swarm attacked other cultivators, striking indiscriminately, causing casualties among the cultivators from the 4 major gates. The survivors scrambled to find cover to avoid the attacks. Seeing this, Jian Jin exclaimed, what a terrifying sword. The energy stored for so long erupted all at once. Indeed terrifying. At that moment, countless flying swords swept in, and little Yuaner once again used her forceful energy to block many flying swords. Kong Yuan was having the hardest time. Jian Jin hadn't expected that Kong Yuan's determination seals could block so many flying swords, creating a separate space. Meanwhile, the chains snapped one after another, and in a blink of an eye, all 8 chains were broken, and the demonic sword finally gained its freedom. The energy from the inscriptions gathered completely, and the blade shimmered with red light. After a slight tremble, the demonic sword turned direction, and all the flying swords automatically made way. The demonic sword thrust towards Kong Yuan through the air. Kong Yuan, of course, saw this scene. His eyes widened, and the determination seal expanded violently, scattering to try to block the demonic sword. But the demonic sword only paused briefly in the air, then stabbed forward again. Jian Jin watched excitedly. This is the demonic sword's territory, strengthened by the 7 absolutes formation. Kong Yuan is out of luck this round. As Jian Jin said, the demonic sword attacked Kong Yuan crazily, as if it had endless power. Kong Yuan, helpless, could only fight the demonic sword with all his might, applying demon zen and Buddhist seals to the sword, but they were like scratching an itch, totally ineffective. As time passed, the power of the demonic sword only grew stronger. The Buddha's golden body appeared. The massive Buddha's golden body repelled all flying swords, yet the demonic sword frantically searched for gaps around the Buddha's golden body. No way, even the Buddha's golden body can't suppress this demonic sword. Jian Jin swallowed hard, wondering to himself, if that's the case, how can I ever get hold of this demonic sword? If even the Buddha's golden body couldn't contain it, it meant Kong Yuan was bound to be defeated eventually. Whether it was the avatar or the golden body, they consumed a lot of energy and couldn't be sustained for long. Indeed, the moment the Buddha's golden body disappeared, the demonic sword flashed past Kong Yuan's body at a terrifying speed. With a pfft sound, Kong Yuan's eyes widened in disbelief as he looked at the demonic sword, murmuring, I am not reconciled. After saying this, he fell from midair, crashing heavily to the ground, motionless. Strangely, the Buddha beads in front of Kong Yuan still emitted a faint light. Seeing this, everyone's expression changed dramatically. Kong Yuan is the abbot of the Great Void Temple, who cultivated the 7-leaf dual zen. How could he be slaughtered by a demonic sword? How is this possible? The crowd was in disbelief, but the facts before their eyes forced them to accept the reality. At that moment, after slaying Kong Yuan, the demonic sword turned its direction towards the cultivators of the 4 great gates. Compared to Kong Yuan, these cultivators seemed weak and powerless, utterly unable to withstand the demonic sword's assault. One by one, time seemed to freeze as blood rained down like a storm. Jian Jin spoke anxiously. Elder, this isn't working. Sooner or later, the demonic sword will come for us. Little Yuan snorted. They deserve it. They acted the same when they attacked Golden Court Mountain. The people from the 4 Great Gates are enemies of the evil Sky Pavilion anyway. It's good that the demonic sword is taking them, otherwise, they would eventually join other sects to attack the evil Sky Pavilion. It might be because their cultivation is too weak. After the demonic sword killed some of the cultivators, it flew towards Lu Zhou and the others. Jian Jin helplessly said, this demonic sword even knows to pick stronger opponents. Qin Jun nodded and speculated, a sword is still just a sword. It can't be wise even if maintained by a formation. I suspect someone is manipulating it behind the scenes. Lu Zhou nodded in agreement with this notion, but as he scanned the surroundings, he found nothing. Just then, Jian Jin leapt forward, his dragon roar sword colliding with the demonic sword, sparks flying and forceful energy intertwining. The two dueled for several rounds, but Jian Jin did not gain the upper hand. Continuing like this would likely result in the same fate as Kong Yuan's. Realizing this, Jian Jin decisively chose to retreat. Jian Jin flashed back to Lu Zhou's side, gasping, I can't beat it. It's too strong, unless we can break this damn formation. Unable to hold back any longer, little Yuan strode forward on clouds, her Brahma Heaven Silk bursting forth. You're too weak, I'll take over. With that, she swung the Brahma Heaven Silk, engaging in a fierce battle with the demonic sword. Seeing this, Jian Jin shook his head and sighed. It's good that the girl is competitive, but she's too reckless. He then turned to look at the composed Lu Zhou and asked, you seem to be confident. Do you already have a method to break the formation? We must break the 7 Absolutes formation to take the demonic sword, otherwise, none of us will escape today. Lu Zhou shook his head and calmly replied, I don't have a method to break the formation. Jian Jin suddenly felt awkward. Don't be like that, I'm scared. Believe it or not, up to you. Lu Zhou then turned away from him, focusing on the battle in midair. Qin Jun then said, the critical point of the 7 Absolutes formation isn't here. We can't break it. Hearing this, Jian Jin anxiously covered his head. It's over. Jian Jin, going to meet my end here? My dream of owning 1,000,000 fine swords is still unfulfilled. At that moment, the demonic sword launched 2 powerful attacks in quick succession, and little Yuaner's forceful energy trembled, forcing her to fly back. After landing, little Yuaner nearly lost her balance. She wanted to rush back into the fray, but Qin Jun quickly advised, stop charging. Your cloud robe feather dress also needs to recharge energy. If you keep going, it could be life-threatening. Qin Jun immediately mobilized his internal forceful energy and charged towards the demonic sword, but being only of the divine court realm, his protective forceful energy was instantly pierced by the demonic sword. His forceful energy shattered, and he was thrown back against a stone wall, coughing up blood. Jian Jin hurried forward to check on him. Are you alright? Qin Jun, seriously injured and trembling, turned to Jian Jin and said, take care of my wife. Seeing this, Lu Zhou was slightly speechless. Throughout this ordeal, he had been contemplating how to tame the demonic sword or break the formation, but he hadn't expected the demonic sword to target them so soon. Back up. Hearing Lu Zhou's voice, Jian Jin and Qin Jun gave a thumbs up, then quickly retreated with little Yuaner to a distance of several dozen meters. At that moment, Lu Zhou rose into the air, surrounded by swirling forceful energy, and then charged towards the demonic sword. Seeing someone provoke it directly, the demonic sword could not restrain itself and slashed through the air towards Lu Zhou. Just as they were about to collide, a 10-meter-tall Buddha's golden body suddenly appeared around Lu Zhou. With a crisp, the demonic sword struck the Buddha's golden body. Hearing the noise, everyone quickly looked up. In the next second, they were stunned by the scene before them. A Buddha's golden body, taller than the giant tombstone, walked through the air to the middle of the 7 Absolutes formation. No matter how furiously the demonic sword attacked, it could not shake the Buddha's golden body at all. The swarm of swords around the 7 Absolutes formation, sensing a powerful adversary, attacked the Buddha's golden body together, the dense swarm of swords blocking the view. However, the 10-meter-tall Buddha's golden body still stood unyieldingly. The cultivators lying on the ground, their eyes filled with shock and awe, exclaimed, so powerful. This is a real Buddha's golden body. Who is this? At this moment, inside the Buddha's golden body, Lu Zhou shook his head, pondering. 10 seconds. The golden body can only last 10 seconds. Where's the formation's critical point? 10 seconds was indeed too brief. Just as the Buddha's golden body was about to dissipate, the demonic sword and flying swords swarmed up, but with a loud bang, another Buddha's golden body expanded. The flying swords that entered the golden body's area were instantly shattered, falling to the ground motionless. Jian Jin watched, dumbfounded. He can even expand and contract the golden body at will. I'm truly impressed. In that instant, dozens of flying swords that fell to the ground were clearly destroyed. Lu Zhou seemed to have found a way, raising his right hand with a short and exquisite nameless sword floating in his palm, emitting a faint red glow. 10 seconds should be enough. In a high-stakes duel, every second counts, especially since the demonic sword showed no intention of dodging. After a moment of thought, Lu Zhou, excited, directly charged charged at the demonic sword. Let's clash head on then.